Good afternoon. I'm not at the Riverwalk today. I'm in the backyard where I live. And recently, talking to someone, and the subject came up of a video that Neal Adams made, which is on YouTube. And I hadn't seen it, so I went and watched it. And he had some things to say about his opinions about copying, and that all the best artists copy, and he lists as about 4 artists that used photo references and basically said that's the only way to do it, and those are the best artists and everything. And it was very, very weird. One of the things in the video at the very beginning, he showed one of his own drawings. I mean, it starts off as if it's a drawing class, you know. And so he shows his own drawing, and he says, so draw this, and holds it there for a minute, and then kind of says, well, no, you can't do that. It's like, you can't possibly do what I do. And anyway, a little background on Neal Adams. Basically what he did with comics was he brought in what at the time was skills from advertising art, and bringing in one element from another field that no one else had put two and two together yet, you know, can elicit some novelty. And Frazetta did it with bringing classical art techniques into paperback cover illustration, for example. So that's basically what happened. If you go back and look at advertising art, late 50s, early 60s, or it was based on photographs. Quite naturalistic and realistic figures, urban settings, various photo-referenced usually, good control of line weight, where there would be details on the face and things, but then the line weight would be a bit heavier in order to isolate things and make the images clearer to read for the viewer, whoever was seeing the advertisements. So anyway, I wanted to make a video. I know that Adams has said some negative things about Jack Kirby. And I've heard things about Jack Kirby from people that really just show that they do not understand what he did, how he worked, and what his techniques were. I saw Dave Stevens, who's no longer with us, say something about Kirby. You know, he admired Kirby, but wanted to have a little more, you know, detail in the hair or something like that. And he basically, you know, this what he imagined as being a flaw in Kirby's work was that the hair wasn't realistic enough or something, or the highlights were wrong, basically. So anyway, that's what this video is about. It's about Jack Kirby versus Neal Adams. And I remember the first Neal Adams comic that he did for Marvel. I was 1970. It was X-Men 57, I think, something like that. Not sure what the year was. It might have 69 or 70, something like that. And up until that point, I was familiar with you know, Marvel and DC comics. And when I saw that, I really felt as if this was not for children. It brought in a level of realism which up till that point had not existed in comics, based on photorealism. And so what ultimately it did to the industry is a bit like what happened with, you know, when Eddie Van Halen came along. He revolutionized everything, and then people tried to emulate what he did, but none of it really came off that well because they hadn't built it from the ground up with a real foundation. So when other people tried to emulate Adams, it didn't work very well. They could get a few things here and there, little facial details and things like that, but generally they couldn't match what he was doing for different reasons, probably because they were not drawing with photographs in front of them or tracing them. They were looking at Adams. So anyway, to go back to Kirby, the thing about Kirby's art And the art is really impossible to, I call it that, but it's impossible to separate from the storytelling, because what the art is supposed to do is it's functional. So it's not that things that he draws were supposed to look like the things in the real world. So Adams would look at Kirby and say, oh, look at the sinews, they're all wrong. It's like, they're not sinews, they're directional lines, which are there for a reason. So with Kirby, the drawing techniques of overlap to make objects come toward or recede away from you to create dimensionality, placement of objects in the panel to create eye paths where you read in a certain direction, leads your eye around the page intentionally. And all those things, people tend to miss those. I use them in my own comic layouts. I use those methods. But what happens when you begin to introduce this sort of level of photorealism into comic storytelling? And we see this today as well with over-rendered details, basically. That is that when you're reading a story, you're following visually, you're perhaps reading words, captions, things like that. A detail of the earlobe has nothing to do with the story. Details of the nostrils or little facial things have nothing to do with the story. And if you stop and look at them, the story stops. So then the question might become, why include them in the first place? Well, because you can draw them, but it doesn't show that you understand comics or that you know how to tell a story. So here again, the difference between Kirby and Adams is that Kirby was a storyteller. He told stories all the time, constantly. And Adams, on the other hand, has, as far as I know, no story to tell. When he's tried to tell stories with his own lines of comics, they've failed. No one's interested. No one can really name a character, Ms. Mystic maybe, something like that. But it all basically died because he's not a storyteller. He has no story to tell. So perhaps deep down he realizes that. And I'm not trying to go after Neal Adams, but I mean, he's put himself out there by saying these things, basically. So anyway, that's one of the troubles we see today, is a lot of extraneous details that don't tell a story. A lot of comic covers which are very, very cluttered, very, very overcolored. Objects can't be separated by the eye easily. And this is why people don't read the comics. They just put them in the bag and put them away. So anyway, there's obviously a lot of friction there, a lot of, some anger, some resentment, because when it comes to Adam's style, it's basically very, very passé. It's over. It's a gimmick. It's been done. No one is emulating it anymore. People like Bill Sienkiewicz, they learned some things from it. They took it elsewhere. Some of the people that Adams talks about as being an influence as far as illustrators that use photographs, he conveniently leaves out Sid Mead. Now, Sid Mead created an astonishing level of reality without using photographs. He constructed everything. Now, the thing about only using photographs is that you wind up, perhaps you study internal structure, bones, anatomy, things like that. But I'm not sure why you would do that, because you're already, you have information in front of you in the photograph. But at any rate, when you are drawing from imagination and you're using construction techniques, it's liberating. You may be able to approach a photograph. As a matter of fact, there are artists that can draw so well, so naturalistically, that they could convince you that they had used a photograph. Now here again, to use Frazetta as an example, Frazetta occasionally used photographs, and he tried to claim that he didn't, but it's been shown that he did use some swipes here and there, but generally he didn't do that. He didn't have to rely on that. He was able to construct figures from the ground up, for mannequins, for skeletons. He understood muscular anatomy and all the ingredients basically, and so was able to create figures like no one had seen before. And essentially what he was doing was he was bringing techniques in from classical art, combining them with more pulp type elements, sexuality, muscularity, things like that. And visually that took things to a new level. He, again, like Adams, had imitators, but these imitators did not understand the craft of how he achieved what he achieved. So they would either use photographs, or they would, you know, here again, I don't want to name names, and I'm sure you know probably who I'm referring to, but they did not check all the boxes, basically, cover all the bases. So anyway, I would conclude this by saying that the people that Adams is claiming are the best artists out there who copy photographs, and that's why they're the best, like he is the best, is that art is only art because it has the statement of the artist, of the individual. So if an artist is working for a comic company and they have a script and they draw the panels, blah, 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 whatever, it could be influential, it could be groundbreaking, whatever. They're not an artist in the strict sense because they have nothing to say. They're a technician. So for example, the artists that Adams mentions, Alphonse Mucha is one, they were illustrators. They were commercial illustrators. Now, this is a subject that gets a lot of argument sometimes because people will go, oh, well, I like that picture. You can't say that's not art. That's art to me when it's illustration. And to know the difference between art and illustration, and like Adams does, to name these artists and then, oh, well, you left out Picasso, you left out Georgia O'Keeffe. I mean, you left out all these people. What? They didn't copy photographs, so they're not as good as the guy that did the movie posters. Is really completely missing the boat. But then again, if you're an illustrator and you have no statement to make, then you don't understand what art is at all. Now, anyone can pick up a pencil and make a mark on a piece of paper. And someone who understands well enough the act of mark making can decode that and tell you a lot about the state of the person emotionally when they made the mark. It's the same thing with handwriting analysis. So the way someone signs their name, it can be analyzed and you can learn an awful lot about the person from the way that they sign their name. Similarly, it's very true with artwork. So someone who is very free with their lines, right? Picasso is one. I've done intuitive art, which is the same sort of, not like Picasso, but it's flowing, free flowing. A single line, never continuous, never picking up the pen from the paper. If you do that, then it speaks volumes about yourself because you cannot lie, just like handwriting, right? Well, what Adams does with his copying is he's hiding who he is. Because you can't analyze his drawings, his copyings, and find out anything about him. So anyway, this is something for psychologists, and when you get, some folks will never ever admit that they need to, get some help, get some therapy, grow, learn, move beyond patterns that they're tied up in and meshed with, things like that. But at any rate, I didn't want to turn this into a boxing match between Kirby and Neal Adams, but basically all the things that Kirby did, that Kirby gets a 10 for, Adams gets a 0 for. So Adams has no story to tell. His artwork is not functional. It's solely designed to draw attention to the artist in a sort of an effect of grandiosity, attention-getting, attention-seeking, right? And in a way, what happened with him, he was in the right place at the right time. Things fell into place. Commercial art, take it over to comics. Frazetta, same thing, learned classical techniques, took it over into paperback illustration and comics and things like that. So these things happen. And every once in a while you have someone that's a groundbreaking artist, you know. But Adams is not one. Or at least if he was, it's done. It's over with. In music, you had a similar thing with Yngwie Malmsteen. And here again, I'm not attacking people, I'm just discussing their work. Yngwie Malmsteen came along, had taken things to another level, could play lickety-split, 100 miles an hour, like if you ever put a playing card in your spokes of your wheel with a, clothespin when you're a kid, it goes, brrr. That's what his playing was like. The ear could not follow it, but people were dumbfounded and astonished by the speed at which he could play. But what it came down to was, what does it say about him? Is it art? What is he expressing besides simply being a show-off? Okay. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Kirby, I could go into more depth about his work, his accomplishments, and this is not fanish. This is simply analytical of who he seemed to be, what he accomplished, and what he achieved in his work.